As stale as general reviews have become for me, Spider-Man 2 presents a unique opportunity to discuss what we mean when we say a sequel offers more of the same. This isn't a bad thing, but it's not a good thing either, so what is it? A literal interpretation would assume that Spider-Man 2 is a carbon copy of the original, which doesn't make any sense. When you play a sequel, the narrative picks up where it left off, but so does the gameplay. At the beginning of Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man can do everything he could do at the end of the first game. Assuming the existence of old abilities, the new skill tree branches into more devastating, but more peripheral effects. Thus, a sequel that's more of the same is as direct and comprehensive an expansion of the original's feats as possible. In particular, Spider-Man 2 doubles down on the franchise's strengths by providing new abilities, 2 additional boroughs to explore, and more formidable challenges. Playing Spider-Man 2 is like watching an unapologetically bad action movie, which is obviously very Sony. The old one ticked that box too. Spider-Man 2 kicks off a badass narrative by having Miles and Peter anxiously equip their superhero outfits to the tune of a completely out-of-place rock song. Not only can players watch the duo team up against a spectacular foe, but that foe is Sandman, whom we don't see in the first game, so he's new to this particular franchise. As I watched Tobey Maguire 3 back in the day, I certainly had working knowledge of the supervillain. Speaking of Tobey Maguire 3, you'll meet Venom at some point too, if you don't want to buy the game for any other reason. Spider-Man 2 does a great job of hyping up Kraven and Venom. In particular, Kraven tempts us to fight back not only with his infinite capacity for cruelty, but also his worthiness as a powerful opponent. He's the kind of enemy who makes me say, "God damn, I hate that guy. What a great actor." What I like most about the narrative, and more specifically the dialogue, is how characters from Miles' story interact with Peter, and those from Peter's story interact with Miles. Peter chats with Genki, while Miles takes calls from MJ. Spider-Man 2 links Miles and Peter's stories as to present an entirely new way of looking at Spider-Man. One Spider-Man can't exist without the other. Both are valid. While Miles is clearly Peter's apprentice, Peter isn't the Spider-Man. A final item that was very Spielberg was the inclusion of reformed criminals engaging in normal non-criminal behavior. If you think about it, this outcome must be at least part of the goal for conventional superheroes who famously refuse to kill their enemies, regardless of universe. Refusing to kill doesn't just make these stories kid-friendly. We've all seen superheroes struggle against their urges for vengeance. Reformed criminals remind us of why superheroes struggle to keep criminals alive, suggesting a world where criminals are reformable. Unfortunately, this strikes me as unique and creative. Like other action-packed superhero stories, Spider-Man 2 requires zero context. It's loads of fun. If you don't know who Harry Osborn or Miles Morales is, you will soon. Any prokaryote can follow the story. As with the first game and the standalone DLC for Miles Morales, Miles and Peter are functionally identical in terms of combat. Spider-Man 2 features supportive gadgets, as well as 4 devastating combat trump cards. 4 for Miles, and 4 for Peter. These power moves obliterate enemies in different ways, but the differences aren't meaningful enough to invite strategy. If a crowd becomes too large to handle, you simply phone in a power move. Since each has a cooldown, you'll have to rotate and avoid using all power moves at once, but there's no strategy beyond that. You might think, oh, well, that's all very stupid because those moves superficially lower the difficulty, and you'd be right, except for the fact that the sequel's enemies are far more capable and diverse. For example, Kraven's hunters throw grenades that create fields of electricity directly above you to prevent aerial combat. Certainly this grenade has been the most frustrating aspect of the game for me, which is exactly why it works, escalating the challenge and forcing players to tap into new abilities. More demanding combat challenges temper the new outrageous abilities of both Spider-Men. You're stronger, but so are enemies. You can use your web wings to glide, but you'll have to cross the East River to reach new playable areas. There's also a parrying ability now, which doesn't just defend you and stagger enemies, but it allows for more devastating follow-up attacks. Bosses are 10,000 times better solely because of how well the development team ripped off Sekiro. Side objectives are another highlight because they're much better than the first games. Much of the time, the opposite happens with sequels. The sheer volume of content and a development team's great ideas scare us away from second playthroughs, or worse, first playthroughs. What I hated most about the first game's district objectives was that I had to run into enough randomly occurring crime activities to receive credit for completion. I even had to score different types of crime activities depending on which faction I was against, whether it was Mr. Negative's demons or good old escaped convicts. Spider-Man 2 doesn't track crime activities, at least not as painstakingly as the first game does. There's no pressure on completion, so participating in crime activities is simply an opportunity to earn more experience points and tokens. As for more conventional side quests with their own mini-narratives, you won't find any thrilling combat challenges, but optional content remains enjoyable from a narrative perspective, by providing a story in which the quest vendor plays a major role. Mostly I was surprised by how different side quests were from each other. There's no go here, kill this. High score challenges have also improved. In the first game, high score challenges were drastically more difficult than any other activity, from the most devastating bosses to the most sprawling bases. In the second one, high score challenges are generally more difficult and technical, but earning a gold medal is much easier as long as you can survive until the end of the challenge. I think one puzzled me a bit, but all were smooth sailing as long as I could reach the end of them. While the first game's high score challenges lowered my confidence, the second ones increased it. In comparison to the first game, there are fewer bases, but they're of higher quality. Maybe feedback included complaints of monotony. There are never too many bases for me to clear, but things were a little more interesting this time. Instead of visiting and clearing a static number of bases, you need to clear 3 outposts to triangulate a base's position before accessing one. The quantity of content the outposts provide may also be part of why there are fewer bases. Finally, collectibles are noticeably merciful. Secret photo ops are gone, and the remaining photo ops are more manageable, not only because there are fewer, but also because the subjects of the pictures you take are far more outrageous than the first games. Unable to repeat obvious landmarks, the development team invites us to take pictures of picket lines, mascots, and frisbee players. The whole experience gave me Humans of New York vibes. Apart from taking pictures for a contact, Peter and Miles must collect extra-dimensional spider bots. There are around 30, and they're fun to find since swinging around the city is fun in the first place. Any number from 30 to 40 is sort of a magic number for collectibles. No matter how big or small a game's world is, 40 is totally doable. Shigeru Miyamoto asked me for 900 Korok seeds just to hand me a golden turd, and that's unacceptable. Addressing every side objective category would be frivolous. The point is that Spider-Man 2's side objectives favor quality over quantity while presenting their own unique differences in comparison to the first game's optional content. In particular, there are brand new puzzle minigames, none of the old puzzles remain, the development team has woven optional content into the single-player campaign instead of encouraging us to save such activities for the post-game. Spider-Man 2 is one of maybe 5 games whose optional content I had completed entirely before the post-game. This is the hallmark of success for optional content. Side objectives are so central to the experience that you won't resist completing them. Maybe you will, but something must be said for the fact that I did it, as I'm not usually the person to finish everything before the main campaign. I often finish everything, but I usually save something for post-game. New Game Plus is another test, and the game honestly doesn't pass. Making an open world game replayable is so difficult because there's so much to do. The developers try to sweeten the deal with superficial character levels, but there's no incentive apart from that and an unlockable difficulty. The main problem is that the primary questline is full of cutscenes. If a scene is skippable, you'll have to open the pause menu to skip it. Many compare the narratives of modern games to movies, but playing Spider-Man 2 again is like re-watching an entire season of television that wouldn't be so good if it weren't a video game on top of a narrative. Spider-Man 2 offers hours upon hours of unadulterated violence. I haven't had this much fun kicking ass since The Return of the King. It's not the type of game that changes your life or helps you grow, but it doesn't need to. You're Spider-Man. You smash people's skulls on beams and assume they'll wake up someday. You don't need to change. You're perfect. More of the same has certainly been enough for me. If you're a fan of Spider-Man or open-world games about clearing bases in general, Spider-Man 2 can't disappoint. In spite of how many extra bells and whistles there are in this hotly anticipated sequel, there are neither lapses in consistency nor occasional bouts of outrageous difficulty. Not that you'll necessarily play it more than once, but the better bosses and better side objectives are worth experiencing. I'm not using that final sentence anymore. It's corny and it doesn't really fit my tone. If mental health permits, I'll see you in a bit.